What's up, guys? I'm Shawnthebro. We are here for another programming tutorial for the fighting game series. So, this time, you will see I have a fancy little guy here. He doesn't have a walking animation yet or a jumping animation, but he did have an entrance, he does have an idle, and he does have an attack animation. Last time I talked about us potentially adding in hitboxes and seeing the results of attacking someone. I decided this one would probably be a better option to do first, which is getting in the animations, because mapping those to buttons, because if we don't use that, it's going to be hard to tell, like, oh, I actually hit this guy and that's why he took damage. So I figured if we added in animations and things like that first, that would be a better option. So we're going to start with that. So I have a basic Mixamo character here. He's called the Mutant. You can find him on Mixamo.com, which I'll show you in just a second. Actually, I can't show it because it's got my account information on it. So, but you don't need to actually know this, how to do this. You can use your default character. My next episode I put out is not going to be necessarily related to the fighting game. It's going to be related to getting characters and animations off of Mixamo and putting them in your Unreal projects. So if you're interested in getting a character like this in your game, so he looks a little bit cooler than the mannequin character, no offense mannequin, then you can see that in the next episode. I will link it on the iCard in the top right about here when that video is out, which should be later this week. So anyway, so that's the goal we're going to get to today. So again, this could be a mannequin character. It doesn't really matter. I'm using special animations because, I want to make it look nice for you guys. And I actually want to start building this foundation so that we can see it come to life. So I'm going to close out of this and we're going to get started. So last time we stopped by making the character HUD, which you saw was still working. And we're not going to do a lot of code today, to be honest. It's going to be a lot of blueprint. Specifically AnimBPs, which you've probably never worked with if this is your first project. So let's get started. Let's get started with the AnimBPs. So what you're going to want to do is make a new AnimBP, which is this. Now you don't have to do this if you're using the mannequin character or if you're using a character whose skeleton matches up with the skeleton of the animations you are trying to use. If you don't know what the skeleton is or the mesh is, then you probably don't have to worry about this. This will only really apply if you're getting animations off online or if you had a rigger work on your stuff and actually paint the mesh with body weights and things like that. So paint the model, excuse me. So yeah, I'm going to show you how to make one, but if you don't need to make one, I will show you how to just access it. So if we go up to our content, I'm going to bring this up for you guys because I can't capture the whole window because of the way my recording software works, so I want to make sure you can see it high enough. If you go to your content and mannequin folder, this is generated by default. I didn't make this. You can go to, I believe it's in character. Nope, try animations. Okay, mannequin, content, mannequin, animations. You'll have third person AnimBP. If you've been following the guide, that's what you'll have. This is what this looks like. I did not write this. This is what comes default with your character. So, honestly, if you don't need to use this, if you're not getting a new character or new animations and you're just going to use the ones that are in here, that's fine. You can feel free to use any of the animations that come with this mannequin or download more that work with that skeleton. For me, I had to make a different one because my skeleton of the mutant did not work with the skeleton of the mannequin. That's why I have a second one here. I made it cleaner, but it's the exact same stuff up to here. This extra stuff I did here at the end, we're going to be doing anyway, so you can feel free to do it in this file. I know that's a little bit confusing, but I wanted to make it obvious. You can do it in either the one that already exists, this one, or you can do it in the Mutant AnimBP, which is the one that I made. And all you have to do is copy the exact same stuff over if you intend to use that functionality, which honestly I do for a fighting game. This is all pretty useful stuff. Okay, so let's get started on how you would make that. So in case you do need to make your own, and you do have a new model from Mixamo or wherever, and new animations you want to use, if you go to Add New, and go to Animation, Animation Blueprint. I'm not going to press this because I've already made one, but if you click this, it'll just open up one like this. I think you have to name it when you first do it, which actually I think we can do that. We're going to learn together. I can't remember. Yeah, so when you click into this originally, it'll have the parent class. So depending on what you want to do, you could use, honestly, any of these. For our case, you can either use Anim Instance or a third-person AnimBP. Now, if you use third-person AnimBP and you're making another one, you'll notice there's only the UE4 mannequin skeleton here. That could be a problem if you're making a new character with a different skeleton. If you want to just make a new character, like the mutant that I did that doesn't have the same skeleton, you can use Anim Instance and then select. For mine is called Idle Skeleton because when I downloaded it from Mixamo, that's what it was called. So you select the skeleton you want to use and then hit OK. Honestly, if you don't understand any of what I just said, don't worry. It's not that important because you don't need to use that right now for this specific tutorial. In my other tutorial that I am coming out and that I am linking with the iCard, I will show you how to actually download those files correctly and import them. So hold off if that's too confusing. Don't stress yourself out. Just go watch that video, and then you'll be all set to go. So let's get into what I'm going to close the default one, but understand this is the same thing. So you should have an animation speed, which is here. Actually, you know what? I'll keep this open so that I can reference it. So this is what yours looks like if you're using the default mannequin. And mine is the exact same thing, no joke. With a little bit, it's a little bit cleaner because theirs is kind of wonky, to be honest. It's kind of all over the place. So all I did for this is getting me character class, getting a variable from it, and setting a variable in the AnimBP. So I'm not gonna, you don't have to do this yet. I'm gonna explain all this, but these are the only changes. This and the anim notify up top. So everything I have highlighted right now, these are the only changes we're making in the actual AnimBP event graph. There are some changes we'll have to make in the state machine. So I will use this as an example again. If you're using the default mannequin, you will already have a default state machine. If you do, great, click on it. It'll bring you to this. If you're making a new character or a new AnimBP, this anim graph won't have this arrow next to it because you won't have a state machine by default. So you can open the graph, and then you can actually right click and type new state machine and add it in. I already have one, so obviously I'm not going to do this. This is this right here. This was the first one I made. But once you place that node, make sure to drag this into the result. Otherwise, your state machine won't be... Sorry, I have an issue with compiling and saving every time I see that yellow. Make sure you drag this into the anim graph output pose node, because if you don't drag this into here, your changes won't be saved. Like, your state machine won't transfer to the model here. So I'm going to do this again just because I'm... At this point, why not? So if you just double click... I'll do it again. So if you just double click the state machine node, it will bring you to here, which is your actual state machine. It will have nothing in it. It won't have these three things in it. These are the three things I added and the three things I'm going to show you today. But if you're using the mannequin, you'll have these by default. So you can kind of already see how that works. So in the state machine, I made three states: entrance, idle, and punch. So entrance is what plays immediately after entry. So your entry node is what it looks like when you start. So entry means basically when this object is loaded in the game, which we have it loaded right here. Instantly, it's on the screen, loaded, ready to go. So that's basically as soon as the game starts, as soon as the scene loads, it's going to put this object into the entrance state. And then the entrance state can go to idle, and then idle can go to punch, and punch can go back to idle. That's how you would read this. So there's a few things to note here. So these states, that's what these little boxes are. If you click into this, double click this, it will bring you to the output animation pose, and you won't have anything here. All you have to do is you have your assets down here. These are the available assets that work with the skeleton. You can just bring them and drag them in like this. And then all you do is drag this node into here. And that's the animation that'll play. So that's all you have to do. In this case, for example, let's say we have idle run. They have a blended run to make it look better, which we can do stuff with later, but don't worry about that now. You could also just do, if this is their default, you could drag this in and connect it like this. So that's all they're doing here. So if you're using the default mannequin, there you go. You already have this functionality, nothing to worry about. However, if you are using the default mannequin and you want to add other animations, make sure you get your animations, whether you download them online or not, whatever. And then you can drag them in from here. So you will have to make new states for punch. If you want to do entrance, just add entrance here. So drag off of this, add state, entrance. What am I doing? Entrance. There we go. And then, drag it to idle after that. There's a few things. I'm going to remove that since I don't have an entrance animation for him. There's a few things you'll have to do. So you see that you can just drag this animation in here, connect these together, and it will play. Easy, right? By default, this will be looped. If you click on the animation node itself, these will be looped. So you can see them in the details panel. Now, you probably don't want the entrance to loop because you want the entrance to go into your idle by default. Usually that's how fighting games work. Like if you're, I don't know, Killer Instinct or Mortal Kombat, they'll say some kind of dialogue beforehand. That's their entrance. So in this case, I didn't do any special camera effects or anything, but same basic thing. This is him sitting on the ground, and you can double click the animation to view which one it is. This is sitting on the ground and he gets up. Again, all these animations are on Mixamo. I'll show you how to get them in the next episode, so don't worry about that. Okay, so I would recommend clicking on this and not looping this animation because you're not going to want to loop your entrance animation. Then make an idle state, so drag off of entrance, add state, and then name it idle or whatever you want. The names don't matter for these. These names are for your eyes only. They're for you and your teammates, if you're working in a group, to make sense of what's going on in the state machine. So you can keep it named whatever you want. I called mine idle. Now, you'll get these little arrows by default. You'll see you have 2 arrows here back and forth and an arrow between each of these. Every arrow you add, or every connection you make, you get an arrow when you drag one thing to another. So if you were to drag this to punch, you get another arrow here. So I'm going to delete that because I don't want to go from entrance to punch ever. But what these are fine. These show you the flow, like idle to punch, punch to idle. But these little, I don't even know like what symbol this is supposed to be. I think this is just one arrow going each way. But these 3 little circles that I have, these are the conditions for that variable, or for that transition rather. So how does entrance go to idle? If you click on this, just single click on this circle, you'll see all this stuff on the right hand side with details. We don't need to touch almost any of it. However, since I automatically want him to go from entrance to idle once his entrance animation is complete, I want to hit automatic rule based. This will be like this by default. It'll be unchecked. And if you want the whole name, it's this. Automatic rule based on sequence, player, and state. So this will be unchecked by default. Make sure you check that if you have any animations that you want to go to that state or make that transition once the animation is done playing. Now, in the case of idle to punch, we don't just want it to play once idle is done because we want idle to stay looped. So if you go into idle, I have it set to loop still because if you could sit in idle, I'll show you here. You can sit in idle here for as long as you want. I don't want his animation to just freeze up instantly. That wouldn't make any sense. And I wouldn't want him to go to punch it when his loop was done, because well, why would you want that? You would want it to go to punch when they press a button, right? This is where some of the variables that we set earlier and some of the functions we made earlier comes into place. Or comes into play, excuse me. So here's the animation. It's set to loop. That's basic enough. This will actually be, you don't even have to touch anything over here. If you drag in your idle animation, it will automatically be set like this. So I did not change any of these values. This transition, however, so let's look at punch. So punch also does not loop, and the punch animation is just like this. It's actually kind of like this rifle butt animation. It's not really a punch, but it works for what we're going for. So that's the punch animation. So to go from idle to punch, what we need is a transition. So if you double click on the little circle, I know we've only been single clicking on this. If you double click on this, it brings you to basically how you can transition. And by default, it'll look like this. It'll say result can enter a transition, and the transition value will be false. Now you could set this to true, but this would mean it would automatically go there once it hits the other state. This means basically anytime it's in the state where it could transition to this. So anytime you're in idle, if this was set to true, it would automatically go to punch because the condition was true. Obviously, we don't want that. So what we do want instead is a variable. I've already made one. Get first attack used anim. Was first attack used anim. You can call it whatever you want. It doesn't matter. This is just the variable I created and named in the variables section in the blueprint. So all I did was hit plus new variable, made sure it was a boolean, and then was first attack used anim. Basically, I kept it a default name like this because I want to replicate this AnimBP for all the other characters we have. So I don't want to be like, oh, use rifle butt attack, because if I call it that and then we create another character and I duplicate this AnimBP, then you're going to have a lot of issues with, oh, well, which one is rifle butt attack? Because your character might not have that. Like, say we use a ninja and he throws a throwing star. Well, his attacks aren't going to line up with the mutant. So I called it something default, like generic. I would recommend doing this if you're going to use the same method and follow this tutorial. But you can call it whatever you want. It doesn't matter. Just make sure you know what it is. So, and then just drag this in here. Basically, if this attack was used, then we're going to transition the state. That makes sense, right? I think that's pretty easy. One of the easier parts of the state machine is the transitions, where you basically just, if this condition is met, then do this. It's just an if statement. Okay. So that basically explains everything. Oh, lastly, the punch to idle. I have no transitions or no conditions in here either. I did the same that I did for entrance to idle. Basically, once the animation is done, you're going to want to go back to idle. So what that looks like is this. So I go here. I do my... Oh, that wasn't focused. I do my attack. And then when I'm done my attack animation, I go back to idle. Right? That makes sense. So basically just check the automatic rule-based checkbox again. So that's all for the state machine. So the last things we need to do to finish this up are set the actual variables, like for example, this one right here, and unset the variable. If we keep this variable set to true once the attack was used once, then it would always go back into the punch loop afterward, because it would return to idle, say, okay, my animation is done, and then it would be in this state and be like, oh, this is still true, so it would go back into here. So we have to make sure we can set this variable appropriately, and set it to true appropriately and set it to false appropriately. Okay, so here we go. And just for the record, this is the same here. You can see if you're using the mannequin, they use the is in air variables. They use some if conditions. So nothing that I'm doing is anything too crazy that you can't see in your mannequin example. So here's what I did. So let's go to the code, because I made these variables in code. So for the header file, all we're making this time is one variable. I copied and I didn't even change the comment. So let's make the comment right now. Has the player used the basic attack? So I literally copied the player health variable below, because you're going to want all the same U property data. I changed the category to something called attacks instead of health, because we're going to have a lot of attacks. at least 4 basic ones by default, so we don't want to crowd our health section. And then make it a boolean instead of a float. I called it was first attack used. This is not the same as the one in the blueprint. This is important. This is was first attack used. The one in the blueprint was first attack used anim. There is an important difference there. I called them very similar things because they're connected in the blueprint, but they're different here, which is important because you don't want them to be named the same thing. Otherwise, you will be confused as to which one is which. So this is was first attack used. All I do is in the constructor, set it to false because when that character is created, they have not attacked yet, obviously. And then in our start attack 1, the function that we made episode 2, I believe, of this series, all I do is set this boolean to true. Was first attack used equals true. So this key should already be bound to your attack 1, as we saw in episode 2. Make sure you save and rebuild your solution, or you can just build it and compile. That's fine. I usually rebuild because rebuild pretty much ensures that Unreal will get all the data that it needs. Wait for this to finish here. If it ever does. Okay, so here we go. I'm going to let that go. That'll be done in a few seconds. Once this... And I think I just heard it. Nope. There we go. Now it's rebuilt. So, for whatever reason, my Unreal is not hot reloading. So make sure you compile if your Unreal does not like to hot reload. That way you can get your changes in Blueprint. You'll know if Unreal didn't do it, if Unreal didn't compile correctly, if you type in was first attack used and you're not getting anything. That just means you need to compile again. So... Okay, so basically, whether you're looking at this guy right here, set speed, this is the mannequin blueprint, if you look at the end here. Basically, I just dragged off this, and we'll do this, I'll do the functionality here with you, so. Fighting template character. So what we did here in the mutant class that made this work is you cast it to your code class, because this object is technically an Unreal class right now, and the Unreal class does not get updated with this class. So to get our new variable that we made, which is was first attack used, we need to make sure we cast it to the proper type, like such. And then you can drag off of the... Oh, and you should use this. If you're using the mannequin class, use try get pawn owner. That will work. You can see I've done it here as well. Try get pawn owner. That cast to fighter template character. In this case, this is okay to do. I know last episode I talked about, oh, you shouldn't always use this, especially in multiplayer games. In this case, I think this is going to be basically always safe because this is the pawn owner of this instance, this mesh, this skeleton, this animation blueprint. So you're always going to want it to be able to cast to the specific character type. Does that make sense? You're always going to want to be able to cast it to this because regardless, if they're using this instance, they're going to want to have this functionality. So you can cast to this, you can drag this in here. Since their blueprint's ugly enough already, I'll just keep it as ugly as it is. If you do want to clean up the blueprint, real quick thing, you can double click on any point of your line and you'll make a reroute node there. So you can make really nice looking straight lines, which that is not one of. But you can make it a little bit nicer and easier to read. And then also if you're having issues like, oh, I can't get this straight, right click on one of the reroute nodes or any instance and then straighten connection. This is actually going to straighten it to this. We want to straighten these together. There we go. See, and now they're straight. That really doesn't matter. I'm not worried about that, but I wanted to show you guys because that's kind of cool to be able to know. Whoops. Kind of cool to be able to know so you don't have really ugly blueprints that you can't read, because that is very easy to happen and will probably happen the first time you work in Blueprint, so don't worry about it. Anyway, now you go to, you take from here and you just basically get your variable that you just made, was first attack used in our case, and then I set, so remember we made this new variable was first attack used anim. So if we, here's how I did it, just plus was first attack used anim. Okay. It's going to be false by default, which is good because we don't want it to instantly go there. and then you just set was first attack use anim. The reason I'm doing this instead of using one variable is because if you go into the state machine where this is used, which is right here, you can technically grab was first attack used. But you need a fighter template character. And you'll notice there's no code flow here. There are technically ways to get around this. But this is a lot of logic to have in just an idle just a transition. Every time your characters want to transition their animations. So I'd recommend just doing this method. It is a little bit, it takes a little bit more work on the event graph, but it saves you a lot of time in the end. So I just recommend doing that. So all we're doing is setting this, not a boolean or anything. Just set this value to this value, because if this first attack used is true, then your character will punch. It will set this value to true, and then it will meet that condition in the transition state, in the state machine we saw earlier. It's that easy. Now, you could do this a few places, but the last part of this is you actually want to set this variable back to false. You don't want this variable being true, because if this continues to be true, then you'll run into the same thing we were talking about earlier. If this is always true, then this is always true, which means your character will always get stuck punching. So we don't want that. So we want to set was first attack used, whoops, and basically just set that to false. And then I made this blueprint node a little bit nicer in my other one, but that's fine either way. And you'll see that's all I did here. That basically does all your logic for any attack you'll ever need to use. So all our attacks can follow that same basic logic. There'll be more to it, but that's the basic way to make an attack fire, have the attack play, and then have the attack go back to the idle state or whatever state you were in before that. There is one last thing I would like to do, and that is ending animations using animation or anim notifies. So here. An anim notify, so if you double click on any of the animations, specifically I'm going to use, this was for was first attack used. So let's go to our attack. So when this is over, I want the anim variable to go back to false. Now, for cancels and things like that that are more complicated than what we're getting into now, this method can also be applied. If you double click on the animation, you'll have this little notifies section below the video. You can right click and add a notify, and then new notify. I did this already. As you can see, I have attack ended. When you make it, it'll look just like this. So you can see I select it, it looks just like this. So I don't want that here. What you can do is you can drag this around like this, and you can place it wherever you want. When this red bar, which I'll pause it, when this red bar right here comes in contact with this notify, I believe it's specifically at this red bar as well. When these two red bars touch each other, the attack ended notify will fire. So the reason we want that is because when this fires, we can actually use something in the AnimBP event graph called anim notify attack ended. So since you've made this anim notify now, if you go back to your event graph, right click, you can do anim notify, and it will come up with your call function and add anim notify event. So if you do the event, it'll show this one for you. If you do the function, add anim notify, then it calls a function to trigger that anim notify. We don't want this one. Sorry, we don't want this one. There are cases when we would want this one. This is not the case right now. So make sure you have this one. This will look just like your beginning node, your event blueprint update animation. Make sure it looks like this. And then all I do when that notify is had is I set the was first attack use anim back to false. So not only is our code variable set to false, but our anim variable is set to false, because we want both of these to be false so that this no longer loops. We don't want him to get caught in this punch loop. These are kind of just a bunch of safeguards. There's a lot of different ways to do these things, but this is the most sound way I know that's easy enough in the state we're in now. There are some other things we could do and we might do down the line, but this is a really easy way to get started where this will always be set back to false. Another important thing, if we have like 4 basic attacks, the good thing is we can keep the attack ended notify on each of those, and we can just extend this list. So if we had the second one, we can set the second one to false too. So this won't clutter up your AnimBP if you do it correctly. Okay, so that's all the code and blueprint stuff that you need, I believe. I don't think I did anything else. Yeah, I think that's about it. So obviously do this in your AnimBP. If you're using your third person, you use the mannequin. Otherwise, use your new one. Oh, and one other thing. So if you are using a new one, make sure you do change the anim class to your new anim class. So just click on your character in the scene or find him in the world outliner here. And then make sure you set the skeletal mesh to your new skeletal mesh if you did get a new one like I did for the mutant. So this is what it looks like by default. It'll be SK mannequin and third person AnimBP. Again, if you change it up, make sure you change it up for these 2 boxes. Then when you play, and you'll see I have this issue. Sometimes you'll get this. This is important to see. Attempted to access missing property player health. If this is a packaged cook build or you're attempting to use an editor only property, it'll tell you where it's coming from. It's coming from our character HUD function. This will happen after rebuilds sometimes. This doesn't actually mean anything's wrong with the project. Sometimes you just get this. It depends on kind of how the projects are linked, Visual Studio and Unreal, as well as kind of the cast that you do. If you make changes to this file, like we added that new variable. Sometimes this will throw an issue. Just recompile the blueprint. I know it's a check. Just recompile it, save it. When you go to play again, you'll see your health bar is back and your issue is fixed. In where I work and when I worked on Fury Strike at Full Sail, we call those fake errors. So basically, they're not really real errors, but they will cause issues in your game if you don't recompile that blueprint. There's a lot of reasons why they happen, so don't worry about it too much. Just try and compile it and save it. And if that doesn't fix it, make sure your code is compiling. When you do the rebuild, make sure you get 1 succeeded, 0 failed, 1 skipped, whatever. Make sure you get 0 failed. If you're having issues with any of that, let me know. I've seen a lot of different cases of this, so I can probably help you. I've probably seen the case you'll be running into. And that'll be it for today, guys. So this is what you should have at the end. One final demo. You should have a character, which this could very well be your mannequin, but using an actual attack animation. And the animation will stop, and you will go back to idle. Now that we can actually see what we're doing, in next episode we will create the hitboxes that go along with the attacks. That way we can actually hit our opponents. And I will allow you to be able to change the color and the visibility of the hitboxes. So if you want to practice mode with hitboxes on so you can see the hitboxes, we'll go over that. And then if you want to make the hitboxes invisible like you would if you're playing the game, in multiplayer and story or whatever, you don't want to see the hitboxes, we'll go over that. So yeah. That's about it for today, guys. I just love watching this little guy get up from his slumber. So I'll add some animations to him to make him look a little bit nicer. And in the next episode, I will show you... The next episode will be a generic how to get Mixamo animations to your game, to your Unreal project, and how to download them in the right format to use and all that. It's actually a pretty tricky process the first time you do it, so I'm not expecting you to know how to do that if you've never done it before. It took me, honestly, a long time to get that set up properly the first time I did it. So I think that's about it for today, guys. I'm Shawnthebro. I really hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please subscribe. That's the most important thing. It shows me that you're paying attention, that you care. And let me know what kind of videos you want to see. I know Robert20 specifically wants to see a Resident Evil 2 health bar remake. Don't worry, I'm actually working on that. So you will be able to see that. And I'll link it in an iCard here in case anybody else wants to see that one as well. And then for everybody else who asks for things, I will get to them, I promise. As long as I don't get too many, I will always get to them. I just want to get a nice head start on this fighting game tutorial because so many people have been asking me about this and are really excited. So I don't want to drag this video on too long. So thank you guys so much for watching, for real. I appreciate it so much. And since I've been doing these programming videos, you guys have been just you've been watching the whole way through. Like, the watch time is up incredibly. So the fact that you guys are that interested in watching the entire time it means a lot. So yeah, that's it. I'm gonna head out, guys. So thank you very much. Let me know what questions you have, and I will see you in the next episode, guys. Goodbye.